On the road 10 hours today. We came back from the Harding lectureship, and I will say that if you ever have a chance to go, it starts the last Sunday of September and runs through Wednesday. If you ever have a chance to go to the Harding University lectureship, go. The speakers were excellent. The classes were great. The topic this time was parables, and I will have to brag a little bit. Samuel sang in the concert choir, and they had a wonderful performance on Sunday night. So the concerts were great. It was a wonderful time to go and see old friends and hear the Word of God preached. So I definitely recommend it. And for those of you who know Seth Newell, we stopped by and met him and his new wife, Jocelyn, in Henderson, Tennessee. He is now working as a librarian at Freed-Hardman, and I think he's found his soulmate, and they look very happy together. It was great to see Seth, and Seth sent his love to the congregation here at Hume Road. And so for those of you that remember Seth, he spoke, I think, at one of the youth rallies and did a lot of work with the men's ministry, with the youth. He was a real servant while he was here. So as I said last week, Song of Solomon. I approach this with much fear and trepidation. I have never taught this book before. I've never preached out of it. I've used it some in premarital counseling. I think when we asked Steve, Steve's preached for several years. He's only preached from it twice. It's not a book that gets preached from a lot. It's not taught. I think the last time it was taught here, Kenny did it in 3 lessons. Okay, so I'm doing it in 2. So I'm setting the bar a little lower than what Kenny did. And last week, after I finished, somebody challenged me. John Ferguson, Brother John Ferguson, came up to me, and he wanted me to bump up the level of the class from a G rating to a PG-13 rating. So we're going to get into the text this week, and I think we're going to do that, John, to make you happy. And then he said, well, you spent 11 weeks on Ecclesiastes. Why aren't you spending at least 8 weeks on Song of Solomon? And I told John that, and he's a former, well, still a preacher, once a preacher, always a preacher. I said, if somebody's going to teach it in 8 lessons, then you're going to do it. So maybe the next time it's taught, we may see John Ferguson up here teaching it. So one of the first things that we looked at, and I think it's really important, especially for this book where there's so much figurative language in it, it's very important to look at your hermeneutical method, your method of interpretation. And these are all the different ways. That's not a conclusive list. That's a few of the major ways that it has been interpreted throughout history. There's the allegorical view, the Jewish allegorical view, where they see it as God's love for Israel as they are going through the wilderness. There's the Christian allegorical view where it's seen as Christ's love for the church. There's the typical view or typology. There's the drama view, the mythological cultic view, and there is the literal view, which has several different flavors. And the particular method of interpretation that I use is the literal didactic view, which basically says that the Song of Songs should be taken literally with its expressions of a romantic love in marriage, and at the same time, the Song of Songs communicates lessons on marital love. With these lessons, the Song of Songs fulfills a didactic purpose. So here's the message of the Song of Songs. Love is mutual. Both parties, the husband and the wife, love one another. Love is exclusive. There is fidelity within the marriage. Love is total. There's a totality to the love of marriage. And almost gave you my illustration, but then I would have been without the illustration when I got to that slide. And love is beautiful. You know, the love that's found within the marriage is beautiful. And this is an outline of the Song of Solomon. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I believe that my wife, Sarah, she's the secretary here, she'll put these slides out into the church website, and you'll be able to get them there. So the first lesson that we're taught is one of chastity. Chastity. I gave David Gardner, is he here, and Bart and Steve a little scare. I didn't feel quite well yesterday, and I said, well, here's my slides. Somebody may have to teach the class tomorrow. I got an email from Bart that says, you've got to be there. So I'm here. So I've got a little bit of a cough today. So I remember back in, I think it would have been about the mid-90s. And I was preaching in North Carolina, and this was before Hamlet. And they were coming out with some new sex education curriculum in the high school. Well, it might have actually even been in the middle school there in Kinston. And they gave a chance for some of the parents to look at the curriculum before they rolled it out. And the parents looked at it and immediately noticed that there was one huge gap in the curriculum. No place did that curriculum talk about abstinence. And they went back to the school board and they asked them why. And sort of got some wishy-washy answers, like, well, the kids don't really practice that nowadays, do they? And, the parents said, well, my children do. And I think by the time they had several meetings and maybe even threatened lawsuits, abstinence was included in that curriculum. So we're going to talk about being chaste or chastity, which is the quality or state of being chaste, as in abstention from extramarital sexual intercourse or intimacy. And that's broken down in 3 different ways: protecting one's virginity before marriage, abstaining from fornication when unmarried, and avoiding adultery when married. It also means abstention from all sexual intercourse, and probably a good example of that would be a Catholic priest vow of celibacy. And it also means, in the Oxford Dictionary, purity in conduct and intention. So we're going to get into the text. We're going to go back to chapter 1. We looked at this a little bit. We're going to see the brothers of the Shulamite girl are introduced in this. Beginning in verse 5 of chapter 1. I am dark but lovely, O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Do not look upon me because I am dark, because the sun has tanned me. My mother's sons, her brothers, were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyards, but my own vineyard I have not kept. So her brothers have set her to work. They've kept her busy. It's one of the things that we like to do. When I work at a church camp as a counselor, and one of the things that we like to do is keep the kids busy so they don't get into trouble. Well, her brothers are doing the same thing. Now we're going to look at the brothers' role in chastity, and we're going to jump to chapter 8 of the Song of Songs or Song of Solomon. And we're going to look at their commitment that they have to defend the integrity of their sister. They're going to first talk about her when she is immature. We have a little sister and she has no breast. What shall we do for our sister in the day when she is spoken for? And they're talking about her wedding day. If she is a wall, we will build upon her, a battlement of silver, and if she is a door, we will enclose her with boards of cedar. See, basically, they're contemplating the future of their sister as she goes through adolescence and the temptations that she's going to come across. And the question in their minds was whether or not she was going to keep herself sexually pure until the day of her marriage. And they used the metaphor of the wall and the door. A wall suggests a boundary and barrier that forbids entrance. A door, on the other hand, is designed for admitting others and giving access to the interior. And as the guardians of the family honor, her brothers want her to grow up as a wall, meaning that she's going to resist all sexual advances. She's going to keep herself chaste or pure. And if she becomes a door, then they're going to have to make further efforts, extra effort to barricade her against those advances. Oops, I went backwards. And the sister, now that she is physically mature, now that she is approaching her wedding day, she's found her beloved. We'll find out her response to her brothers. I am a wall, and my breasts like towers. Then I became in his eyes, and she's talking about Solomon, as one who found peace. I am a wall. She kept herself chaste. She kept herself pure. And because of that, she finds peace for herself, but also peace for Solomon. And throughout the book of the Song of Songs, you're going to find a vineyard or a garden motif used to describe the Shulamite girl. She says, my own vineyard is before me. You, O Solomon, may have 1,000, and those who tend its fruit 200. So she's making a little play on words here because she's really talking about herself as a vineyard and those who have tended the vineyard, those who have helped to keep her pure, those who have helped to keep her chaste, her brothers. And she's basically telling Solomon, look, I didn't do this on my own. I had my brothers help me defend my integrity, defend my honor. She's saying they get some of the credit. Now that's kind of hard sometimes within families for sisters to give her brothers credit or vice versa because of sibling rivalry. But, she's saying, credit for whom the credit is due. In Solomon's response, he doesn't question her virtue. In chapter 4, verse 12, he says, in describing the Shulamite girl. A garden enclosed is my sister, my spouse, a spring shut up, a fountain sealed. He knows that she has kept herself pure for the marriage bed. So you guys know that I usually teach a discussion class, and I think I've lectured, somebody turned the clock around. Lectured enough. There's David. Gave you a little bit of scare last night, didn't I, Dave? Okay. So the Shulamite brothers took the defense of their sister's virginity, her chastity, seriously. So here's my question. What is the family's role in chastity for the sons, for the daughters? Well, actually, the whole family. What is their role? Okay. So basically, the importance of keeping oneself pure for marriage, or once within marriage, keeping oneself pure, and then also practical ways on how to do that. Bart. Mm-hmm. 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 Right. Mm-hmm. So it must be discussed within the family, and it must be discussed in a biblical way. What does God have to say about this? And basically, it starts back at creation. Woman was made for man. The man leaves his father and mother and cleaves to his wife. So this goes all the way back into creation theology and goes throughout the Bible. Paul has quite a bit to say about it as well. Steve. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Because there's a few television shows that if your teenager were to watch those shows, they would get the idea that every other teenager out there is sexually active, that they're not keeping themselves chaste and pure. So keeping the door closed is a great advice. Watch what our children watch. Watch what they're looking at on the internet. Watch who they're hanging out with, what movies they're going to see, what music they're listening to, what they're reading. And it takes a lot of effort on the family's part to ensure chastity. Anybody else? Howard. Mhm. So you could use that as a line of reasoning to rationalize your own behavior. And the temptation is there. The temptation is there as a teenager. The temptation is there as a young adult. The temptation is always there. The temptation is there when you're married. It's always there. So everyone here has to play a part in guarding their own chastity or their own fidelity to their spouse. And so here's my next question. Does the church have a role? I see head shaking. Okay. So the church needs to reinforce biblical truths about the family, about sex. Now, I think Ashley, didn't she do something with the girls when she was in high school? I think she got some of the girls together and they did a fashion show. Okay, they did a purity day. And I think that your daughter has done something as well, but they did it as a sleepover, I believe, at your house. So there, the church has played a part in teaching. What does the Bible have to say about purity? Do we hold each other accountable? Are we accountable to one another? Kenny says yes. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, it was excellent. I remember, and what I commend them for is before the class was even on the docket, they came to us and they said, "This is what we want to do, and we want your daughter to be part of it. You know, will you be willing to commit her to this?" And we looked at it. We looked at the curriculum. We said, "Yes, we want her to be a part of that, to be in those classes." And everyone here, if your children participated in that, they did a great job. Yes, sir. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. It was like that in the '70s too. When I was in college, that's the way it was treated. So the same way. And and if you dared to say otherwise, you were either looked upon as a prude or as old-fashioned. You got to get with the times. I don't know if people still use that phrase. Sometimes I say these phrases out of the '60s and the '70s, and I wonder, do people still say that? So let's go back to accountability. Are we accountable to one another? Kenny shook his head yes, but he's already talked tonight. Let's get somebody who hasn't. Unless no, yes, sir. Mm-hmm. And we are. Mm-hmm. And we're not responsible for each other's salvation. Well, in a way we are, but everyone has to work out their own salvation with fear and trembling. But there's a way that we are accountable. Kenny? Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's a great idea. Not causing someone else to stumble. And that could go to how men and women dress, how they conduct themselves, what language do they use. What? Mm-hmm. So we are accountable to one another. We should be an example for one another. Now, my favorite example for accountability is 1 Corinthians 12 or Romans 12. We're a body. Paul uses the illustration of a body. And some people are big toes, and the body can't run without a big toe. So that's a pretty important position. Some people are fingers, some people are eyes, some people are mouths, some people are ears, some people are hands to serve, some people are the feet to go. We're a body, and the body has to function together to work efficiently. And if the little finger is struggling with sexual temptation, then the rest of the body has to help out because it's hurting the whole body. Anybody else? We need to move on. Oh, Steve. No, go ahead. Go ahead. Hmm. Yeah. So, Steve is going to preach us a sermon on accountability, right? Is that what I heard? Okay, great. And I'm not going to say the last question. Does the community have a role? Yeah. Unfortunately, our children listen to those in the community, and it's a negative influence at this time. So yes. Okay. So, brother Howard, yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So a lot of times, Hmm. So family, extended family. But as John said, unfortunately, our children will listen to their peers rather than the church or family. So well, that's a question for another time. We got to go. The wedding processional, and we're just going to read through this very quickly. And this is the Shulamite girl that's speaking. Who's this coming out of the wilderness like pillars of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with all the merchants' fragrant powders? Behold, it is Solomon's couch, with 60 valiant men around it, of the valiant of Israel. They all hold swords, being expert in war. Every man has a sword on his thigh, because of fear in the night. Of the wood of Lebanon, Solomon the king made himself a palanquin. Anybody know what a palanquin is? A chair? It's a covered litter designed to hold only one person. He made its pillars of silver, its support of gold, its seat of purple, its interior paved with love by the daughters of Jerusalem. And then finally in chapter 3, verse 11, we have the wedding scene. Go forth, O daughters of Zion, and see King Solomon with the crown with which his mother crowned him on the day of his wedding, the day of the gladness of his heart. And then we have preparation for intimacy. And so basically, I guess this is what I want you to think about here. How do we speak the language of love to our spouses? Now, I told you last week that probably 90% of what Sarah and I say to each other, did you pay this bill? Did you get the bread and milk? When are you coming home for supper? And a lot of those are text. So, that's not exactly the language of love. When I come home with the bread and the milk, I guess that's the language of love because I'm doing what she's asked. But, it's not one that really sparks intimacy. So how does a husband and wife speak to one another to draw each other closer into intimacy? That's what I want you to think about. And here, this is Solomon speaking to the Shulamite woman. Now, here's what you don't do, husbands, to get your wife to be more intimate. You don't walk in the door and you don't say, "Woman, where's my supper?" Don't do that. It is not going to draw her closer. I will guarantee it. If you do it, you better have a smile on your face and you better hug her quick. So here's Solomon speaking to the Shulamite girl. Behold, you are fair, my love. Behold, you are fair. You have dove's eyes behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats going down from Mount Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of shorn sheep, which have come up from the washing, every one of which bears twins, and none is barren among them. Your lips are like a strand of scarlet, and your mouth is lovely. Your temples behind your veil are like a piece of pomegranate. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built for an armory, on which hang 1,000 bucklers, all shields of mighty men. Your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle, which feed among the lilies. Now, if you read all 8 chapters of the Song of Songs, you're going to find out that Solomon's not the only one that's praising his beloved, but the Shulamite girl is also praising her beloved as well. They're both speaking the language of love. They're both drawing each other into intimacy. You look at the things that he compliments just in that short section right there. Eyes, hair, teeth, lips, mouth, temples, neck, breast. He compliments pretty much all of her in total. Now, this is the PG-13 section, but the language is so figurative that we see the garden motif again in this. Beginning in chapter 4, verse 16. Awake, O north wind, and come, O south. Blow upon my garden that its spices may flow out. Let my beloved come to his garden and eat its pleasant fruits. And then in chapter 5, verse 1, this is Solomon. I have come to my garden, my sister, my spouse. I have gathered my myrrh with my spice. I have eaten my honeycomb with my honey. I have drunk my wine with my milk. So now we've got the physical consummation of marriage. We've seen the introduction of the lovers, the wedding processional. We've seen her being chaste to her wedding day. We see the wedding day, we see the consummation. But all is not right between Solomon and this Shulamite girl. There's some fear and insecurity. Now, she had a lot to feel insecure about. Solomon had 700 wives who were all of royal heritage, and he had 300 concubines. She had a lot of competition within the palace. And then she was different. She was dark-skinned. And John wanted me to bring that out as well. She was dark-skinned, so she was different. And then there's a couple of dream sequences within chapter 3 and chapter 5 there where she's frantic. She goes out and searches for her beloved. In chapter 3, she finds him, but in chapter 5, she does not. So the dream sequences seem to show that there is some insecurity there about their relationship. So not all is not well. Then in chapter 8, verse 6, she says, set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for love is as strong as death, jealousy as cruel as the grave. Its flames are flames of fire, a most vehement flame. And actually that was supposed to say, what can the church do to relieve the fear and insecurity of the wife? Or no, what can the husband do? I'm sorry. What can the husband do to relieve the fear and insecurity of the wife? And then what can the wife do to relieve the fear and insecurity of the husband? Because men have their fears and insecure moments as well when it comes to the marriage. And I'm running out of time. I'll give you a minute or two to answer. What can the husband, what can the wife do? Honesty in all communication. Anybody here that's been married more than 35 years? How'd you do it? How did you remain intimate all those years? How'd you deal with fear and insecurity? Keep the Lord in the picture. Anybody else? Yeah, I'm just a young one, 25 years. Honesty, openness, forgiveness. I think that to me, openness suggests that you tell each other that you're vulnerable. I have this insecurity when it comes to us. And this is why I feel this way. And this is what you do to make me feel this way. Man, if you love that person and you want that intimacy, then you're going to correct your behavior. And trust plays a huge role. Anyone else? Okay. And we're not going to answer this question because we're running out of time. What can the church do to keep the demons of fear and insecurity from destroying marriages? Because the church plays a role as well. And for illustration, Jamie Lee Curtis, I think the first time I ever saw her in a movie was in the movie Halloween, which scared me to death. And I really liked her in Christmas with the Cranks. But she was asked about her marriage of 31 years to Christopher Guest. Christopher Guest was the man with 6 fingers in The Princess Bride. So they've been married for 31 years. And so on the Today Show, they says, well, can you give us any advice? Can you help those people out there that are struggling with their marriages? And she said 3 words: don't get divorced. And she says that several times people have come and asked her to write a book. And she says, if I write a book, it's going to be called Don't Leave. Great advice. Then we see fidelity. Again, chapter 8, verse 6. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm. And we see, I'm going to answer this question myself. Why should you want to be like a seal over his heart? Because of that insecurity, that fear that she thinks is destroying intimacy within the relationship. And I'm trying to get through this as quick as I can. Righteous jealousy. For love is as strong as death, jealousy as cruel as the grave. Its flames are flames of fire, a most vehement flame. So my question, is it ever right to be jealous? And John back there is shaking his head, and we had a conversation about this last week. Can you repeat some of what you said last week, John? Okay. Okay. That intimacy, that belongs to your wife if you're the husband. And if you're the wife, that belongs to the husband. Just as your bodies belong to one another, that you find in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Now, we have a jealous God. Why is he jealous? Because he's our creator. He owns us. He's sovereign. And yet we go after idols. So he's jealous for what he owns. Well, within the marriage, the woman owns the husband. The body of the husband owns the wife. And we're jealous toward each other, toward what we have a right to. Somebody say something back there? Okay. Okay. And then we're going to get to the final. So I think there can be a righteous jealousy, especially when you think about the fact that we have a jealous God. And yeah, this is the last slide. The totality of love. Many waters cannot quench love, nor can the floods drown it. If a man would give for love all the wealth of his house, it would be utterly despised. Love is worth more than all you have. You know, my brother-in-law, when he was pursuing my sister-in-law, I asked him about how their relationship was going, and he says, I have found the pearl of great price, and I'll give all that I have for her. The totality of love. Thank you very much for putting up with me for this quarter. Have a great evening.